My wife let her brother manage our savings. Then I found out where the money went. I trusted my wife when she said her brother was good with money. Months later, our savings vanished, and I discovered he was funding his secret life with my wife's full knowledge. The betrayal forces me to choose between exposing them or protecting my kids. When I opened the banking app and saw the balance drop to zero, I felt the room tilt, like the floor had quietly decided to give up on me. I was standing in the kitchen, one hand braced against the counter, the other gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles went pale. The kettle had just clicked off behind me, a thin ribbon of steam curling toward the ceiling. It smelled like burnt toast because I'd forgotten it in the toaster again. That had become a habit lately, forgetting small things. But this wasn't small. This was everything we'd saved for 10 years, gone. For a long moment, I honestly thought it was a glitch, a loading error. I refreshed the app, logged out, logged back in. The number didn't change. Zero didn't blink or apologize. It just sat there, calm and final. I remember thinking very clearly, I need to sit down before I fall. That was how it started. Not with shouting or tears, just silence, and the low hum of the refrigerator, and the sudden understanding that something in my life had already broken before I noticed the crack. Before all of this, our life was ordinary, comfortably so. My wife, Laura, and I had been married for 12 years. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house with beige siding and a backyard that never quite grew grass evenly, no matter how hard I tried. We had 2 kids, Evan, 9, who asked too many questions, and Mia, 6, who hummed to herself when she colored. Mornings were loud, evenings were tired, weekends were for soccer games, grocery runs, and folding laundry while half watching whatever series we were slowly making our way through. I worked as a project manager for a construction firm. Laura handled HR for a mid-sized medical office. We weren't rich, but we were careful, responsible. The kind of couple who talked about retirement in cautious, practical sentences. We had a shared savings account we'd been building since before Mia was born. Emergency fund, college fund, the just-in-case money. Money had never been romantic for us. It was just agreed upon. Pay the bills, save what we could, don't gamble, don't get cute. Which is why when Laura first suggested that her brother help manage our savings, I hesitated. Her brother, Mark, was the opposite of careful. He was charming, confident, always talking about opportunities. He'd bounced between jobs his entire adult life, usually leaving with a story about how he'd been undervalued. At family gatherings, he held court with a beer in his hand, explaining crypto trends or real estate flips to anyone who'd listen. He spoke fast, smiled wide, never seemed worried about money, despite never seeming to have much. He's really good with numbers, Laura said one night, rinsing dishes while I dried them. The kids were already in bed. The house had settled into that soft nighttime quiet. I remember raising an eyebrow. Mark? She sighed, the way she did when she felt I was being unfair. He's not irresponsible, he just takes risks, calculated ones. That should have been my first clue. The way she said it, a little too rehearsed. But I trusted my wife. More than that, I trusted us. Laura had always been grounded, thoughtful. If she believed in something, it was because she'd waited carefully. We don't need anything fancy, I said. I just don't want to lose what we've worked for. We won't, she said quickly, turning off the faucet. I wouldn't let that happen. She put her hand on my arm, warm, familiar, reassuring. Looking back now, I realize how much weight I placed on that moment, on that simple sentence. I wouldn't let that happen. We started small, a portion of the savings. Mark set up spreadsheets, sent occasional updates, percentages and projections that looked impressive enough if you didn't stare too long. Laura would glance at them on her phone, nodding, satisfied. I didn't ask many questions, not because I didn't care, but because I believed her when she said it was under control. Life went on. Lunches packed, homework checked, bills paid. The money stayed out of my mind. Until the morning it disappeared, and the kettle screamed itself dry while I stood there realizing I had no idea who I'd actually trusted. I didn't tell Laura right away. That's something I still wrestle with. Why my first instinct was silence instead of panic. Maybe it was shock, or maybe some part of me already knew that once I spoke, there would be no going back. Words have a way of making things permanent. I closed the app and set my phone face down on the counter, as if that could erase what I'd seen. The kettle had gone cold by then. I poured the water anyway, the tea bag floating uselessly at the surface. I took one sip and set the mug down untouched. The kids came downstairs soon after, backpacks thumping against the wall, shoes half-tied, arguing about whose turn it was to feed the dog. I moved through the motions, pouring cereal, signing a permission slip, reminding Evan to grab his jacket, while my mind replayed that 0 over and over again, like a bruise you can't stop pressing. Laura came down last, already dressed for work. She kissed my cheek, distracted, scrolling through her phone. "You okay?" she asked casually. "You look pale." "Didn't sleep much," I said. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. She nodded, satisfied. We had become efficient that way, accepting surface answers to keep the day moving. After the kids left, the house felt too quiet. I picked up my phone again, opened the app, still 0. No pending deposits, no alerts. Just a clean, empty number where our future used to be. I scrolled through the transaction history. That's when I noticed the pattern. Small transfers at first, then larger ones. Whole chunks moved out over weeks, not all at once. There were memos attached to some of them, cryptic notes like investment allocation or short-term hold. The final withdrawal, the one that drained the account completely, had happened 2 days earlier, while we were all sitting around the table arguing about pizza toppings. My chest tightened. I called the bank. The woman on the other end had a calm, professional voice. She confirmed the balance, confirmed the transfers, confirmed that the account holder, Laura, had authorized them. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" she asked. I almost laughed, almost cried. "No," I said, "that's all." I sat there for a long time after the call ended, staring at the wall clock as it ticked forward, completely indifferent to my life unraveling. I kept thinking about all the times Laura had reassured me, all the times I'd chosen not to look too closely, because trust felt easier than doubt. By the time Laura came home that evening, I'd already decided not to accuse her, not yet. She moved around the kitchen like always, setting her purse down, loosening her hair, asking about the kids' homework. The normalcy of it all felt surreal, like a set built to hide something rotten behind the walls. "How was your day?" she asked, opening the fridge. "Fine," I said. Then, carefully, "Mark check in at all?" She paused, just for a second, but I saw it, the smallest hitch in her movement, like a skipped heartbeat. "No," she said. "Why?" "No reason, just curious." She nodded, satisfied. We had become efficient that way, accepting surface answers to keep the day moving. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. Laura was on her phone more, smiling at messages she didn't share, taking calls in the other room. When I asked what she was doing, she'd say work stuff or Mark asking about something. Her tone stayed light, but there was a tension beneath it, like a wire pulled too tight. I started checking the savings account compulsively, even though I knew it wouldn't change. 0 had become a kind of dare. One night, after Laura fell asleep, I picked up her phone from the nightstand. My hands shook as I held it. I hated myself for it. I'd never gone through her things before, but this didn't feel like jealousy or control. It felt like survival. The phone unlocked easily, same passcode she'd used for years. I opened her messages. At first, it was just normal stuff. Group chats, work reminders, family plans. Then I scrolled down and saw Mark's name. Dozens of messages. Recent. Constant. I opened the thread. They weren't talking about investments. They were talking about him, about rent being due on an apartment I didn't know existed, about cash advances, about keeping this quiet a little longer. Mark complained about pressure, about needing more time. Laura reassured him, promised she'd figure something out. One message stood out, stamped from 3 weeks earlier. "Mark, I don't know how long I can keep this up." Laura, "You can. We've already gone this far. He doesn't need to know." I read it again and again. He doesn't need to know. My chest burned, not just from the money, but from the ease with which she decided I was the one who could be kept in the dark, the one whose trust was expendable. I locked the phone and set it back down, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid it would wake her. I lay there staring at the ceiling until morning, listening to her breathe beside me, wondering when exactly my wife had stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as an obstacle, and worse, wondering what exactly Mark needed all that money for. I didn't confront them right away.
That might sound weak or cowardly, but the truth is I needed to understand what I was standing on before I decided which way to fall. Once you say the words, "I know," the ground shifts, people harden, stories change, and I needed the truth before it learned how to hide from me. So I watched. I watched Laura the way you watch a stranger on a train, quietly, carefully, noticing the things you used to ignore. The way she checked her phone before speaking, the way she'd sigh, like she was carrying something heavy she couldn't set down, the way she flinched when I mentioned money, even casually. I watched Mark, too. I hadn't seen him in person for a while, which suddenly felt deliberate. He'd always been the kind of guy who showed up unannounced, ate our food, talked too loud. Now he was absent, present only through my wife's screen. That absence gnawed at me. One afternoon, I left work early and drove past his old place, the duplex where he'd lived for years, the one he was supposedly renovating. The driveway was empty, the windows dark. A "for rent" sign leaned crookedly in the yard. I sat in my car longer than I needed to, staring at that sign like it might explain everything. That's when I realized this wasn't just mismanagement. This was something else, something planned. The answers didn't come all at once. They never do. They arrived in pieces, like shards you cut yourself on when you're not careful. I followed the money. Not like a detective, more like a desperate husband with too much time and a growing sense of dread. Late nights, spreadsheets open on my laptop, bank statements printed and highlighted. Transfers moved through accounts Mark had access to, then disappeared. Cash withdrawals, payments to places I didn't recognize. One name kept repeating. A high-end lounge downtown, the kind with velvet ropes and frosted windows. I'd driven past it 100 times without ever going in. I Googled it. Then I sat back in my chair, my mouth dry. The lounge wasn't just a bar. It was attached to private event rooms, membership-based, discreet, known, according to a few carefully worded reviews, for hosting exclusive lifestyles. I closed the browser. I told myself I was reading too much into it, that there had to be another explanation. But deep down, something had already clicked into place. The confirmation came from an old, unexpected source. A week later, I ran into Jenna, Mark's ex, at the grocery store. We stood awkwardly by the freezer section, pretending not to notice how long it had been since we'd last spoken. "Hey," she said, "how's everything?" There was something in her voice, cautious, curious. "Fine," I said. Then, before I could stop myself, "Have you talked to Mark lately?" Her lips pressed together. "No, not since I found out." "Found out what?" I asked. She looked around, then leaned in slightly. "He didn't tell you?" My heart started to race. "Tell me what?" She exhaled slowly. "He's been living two lives for years. He's got this whole other identity. Different name, different crowd, parties, women, men, expensive tastes. No job that could possibly support it." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the aisle. "He said he had an investor," she continued. "Someone who believed in him. I figured it was a lie. I didn't think it was family." I thanked her and walked away before she could see the look on my face. In the car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my thoughts loud and chaotic. Images I didn't want flickered through my mind. Mark laughing somewhere in the city, spending money my kids had unknowingly helped save. Laura standing beside him, shielding him, choosing him. That night, I confronted her. Not with shouting, not with accusations, just the truth, laid gently but firmly between us, like something fragile and sharp. "We need to talk," I said, after the kids were asleep. She stiffened. "About what?" "Our savings, or what's left of them." She didn't sit down. She stayed standing, arms crossed, like she was already bracing for impact. "I know the money is gone," I continued. "I know you authorized the transfers, and I know Mark isn't investing it." Her face went pale. Then, slowly, her shoulders dropped. "I was going to tell you," she said. "When?" I asked. She looked away. "When it worked out. And if it didn't?" Silence. I told her what I'd learned. About the lounge, about Jenna, about the messages. With each sentence, her expression shifted. From denial, to fear, to something dangerously close to relief. "He would have been ruined," she said finally. "You don't understand. He needed help." "So you gave our children's future?" I asked quietly. She flinched. "It was temporary. That money is gone. I thought he'd pay it back." "You knew. You knew he was living this secret life." Tears welled in her eyes. "He's my brother, and I'm your husband." That was the moment I realized the betrayal wasn't just financial, it was moral. She hadn't made a mistake. She'd made a choice, and she'd made it knowing exactly who would pay the price. I stood up, my legs unsteady. "You need to decide," I said, "because I'm done carrying this alone." Her voice cracked. "Decide what? Whether you're willing to face the consequences or whether you expect me to protect you from them." She didn't answer, but the silence told me everything. I didn't sleep that night. Laura cried quietly beside me, her back turned, shoulders rising and falling in uneven rhythm. I lay there staring into the dark, listening to the house make its familiar sounds, the tick of the radiator, the soft thud of the dog shifting downstairs. Things that used to anchor me, now they just reminded me how much I stood to lose. By morning, I had made a decision. Not the final one, but the first step. I wasn't going to explode our family out of anger, and I wasn't going to quietly swallow the betrayal either. I needed leverage, truth, a way forward that didn't leave my kids standing in the blast radius of someone else's recklessness. So, I called a lawyer. Not a dramatic call, just a quiet consultation during my lunch break, sitting in my car with the windows cracked open. I explained everything carefully, the joint accounts, the authorization, the deception. He listened, asked questions, paused often. When I finished, he said, "Legally, your wife didn't steal from you, but ethically, that's another story. And your brother-in-law, depending on how the money was used, could be in serious trouble." "Could my kids be affected?" I asked. He answered honestly, "That depends on what you choose to do next." That night, I asked Laura to sit with me at the kitchen table. No TV, no phones, just us. "I'm not covering for him," I said calmly, "and I'm not lying to protect you." Her eyes filled instantly. "You'd destroy our family?" "No," I replied. "You already damaged it. I'm deciding how much more damage happens." She reached for my hand. I pulled it back, not in anger, just clarity. "You have one chance to fix this," I continued. "You tell Mark he returns every cent he can, immediately, and you come clean with both families before I do." Her voice shook. "He can't. It's gone." "Then he faces that truth, and so do you." The next few days were tense, heavy with waiting. Finally, Mark came over on a Thursday evening. He looked thinner than I remembered, jittery, his usual confidence replaced by something brittle and defensive. We sat across from each other at the same table where my kids did homework. I didn't raise my voice. "You used our savings," I said. "You lied, and you put my children at risk." He tried to joke at first, then he tried to justify, then he tried to blame Laura for offering. That was when I stood up. "This conversation isn't about forgiveness, it's about accountability." Laura cried openly now. Mark stared at the table. "You will repay what you can," I continued. "You will stop expecting us to shield you. And if I find out you've lied again, I will report everything." For the first time, he looked afraid. The truth didn't stay private for long. Laura told her parents. I told mine. The story spread slowly, painfully through the family, without embellishment, without cruelty, just facts, choices, consequences. Mark lost more than money. Friends disappeared. Invitations stopped. His investor myth collapsed under the weight of reality. Laura took a leave of absence from work. The shame sat on her heavily. Some days she barely spoke. I moved into the guest room, not out of spite, but space. The hardest part was the kids. We didn't tell them everything, just enough, that money had been lost, that Mom and Dad were working through something serious, that it wasn't their fault. One night, Evan asked me, "Are we still okay?" I hugged him tightly. "We're working to be." Months passed. We tightened our lives, cut back, rebuilt slowly. Mark repaid a fraction of what he took. The rest was gone for good. Laura and I started counseling, not to save the marriage automatically, but to understand whether it deserved saving. Some wounds don't heal cleanly. Some trust doesn't come back the same shape. But something did change. The lies stopped. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again, even if it was smaller than before.
The house feels different now, not emptier, just quieter in a way that carries meaning. There are mornings when the light comes through the kitchen window just right,
catching the dust in the air, and I remember how close we came to losing everything that mattered. Not the money, the us that lived inside these walls. Laura and I are still here. That surprises people when they find out. They expect a cleaner ending, a villain punished, a marriage dissolved, a clean break that fits neatly into a moral lesson. Real life doesn't work like that. It rarely offers endings without fingerprints. We didn't snap back into love. We inched toward honesty. Therapy was slow and uncomfortable, long silences, conversations that ended without resolution. Laura learned how to sit with the weight of what she'd done without defending it. I learned that forgiveness isn't a decision you make once. It's a boundary you renegotiate every day. Some nights I still wake up early and check the bank account out of habit. The numbers are smaller now, humbling, but they're honest. Every dollar there is one we can see, track, and trust. Mark moved out of state. No dramatic goodbye, no apology that fixed anything, just distance. He sends a check occasionally, irregular, always less than promised. I deposit them without comment, not for closure, for responsibility. Laura doesn't talk about him much anymore. When she does, it's without excuses. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. Kids always do. They notice the tension lifting before they understand what caused it. Evan sleeps better now. Mia laughs louder. That alone tells me I made the right choice in not turning their lives into collateral damage. There are scars, though. I notice them in small moments, when Laura asks before touching my phone, when she double-checks decisions she used to make automatically, when I hesitate just a second too long before saying, I trust you. Trust, I've learned, isn't a feeling, it's a practice. Some evenings we sit on the back porch after the kids are asleep, the same old chairs, the same uneven grass. We talk about boring things, work, weather, weekend plans. It's not romantic, it's real, and real feels precious now. I don't regret standing up. I don't regret refusing to be silent. And I don't regret choosing a path that protected my children over my pride. What I learned is this. Betrayal doesn't always come with malice. Sometimes it comes disguised as loyalty, as family, as love twisted just enough to justify harm. The hardest part wasn't losing the money. It was realizing that trust, once given freely, must sometimes be reclaimed with courage. If you were in my place, caught between exposing the truth and protecting the people you love, what would you have done? If this story moved you, consider sharing it or supporting the channel. And if you've ever faced a quiet betrayal that changed everything, you're not alone. Sometimes choosing dignity is the bravest investment we ever make.